It was in the end of March that I jump-started my first garden bed in my new home by sowing kale. I had sown it directly within my newly built protected enclosure. This chicken wire clad cage with removable sides would keep my growing greens safe from the marauding wildlife that was sure to be attracted by the smell of fresh kale. In my previous gardening experience, I learned that fresh kale is powerful in attracting groundhogs, and while I was lucky to not have deer grazing around my old garden, I can only imagine that they love it just as much. I wasn't taking any chances here, so that had to be protected. To keep them growing healthy and strong, I started mulching my bed with a layer of grass clippings whenever I had to cut the lawn. This is a great way of reusing a resource you may have around that is currently neglected, being treated as trash. There is of course a risk you run by using grass clippings. They can add weed and grass seeds to your garden bed. I personally don't care about it because the way I prevent seeds from sprouting where I don't want them growing is by keeping a thick enough layer of mulch in the ground all the time. That is, I use chopped up grass and weeds to keep grass and weeds from sprouting, all the while feeding my desired plants. This works out really well during the growing season, especially if I'm vigilant about keeping the soil always covered. During early spring, it can be a bit more of an issue since by then, a lot of the thick blanket of plant matter I have laid in the autumn to overwinter will have been eaten up by the soil, literally fertilizing the ground as the garden sleeps. This can lead to a few weeds growing during these gap weeks, especially for the brief period of thaw before the grass has had a chance to grow and provide more mulching material. In any case, it still works out for me, even if I may have to do one annual weeding in early spring. By following this regimen, the soil of my last garden only grew better, displaying lighter tilth and structure, and showing signs of greater fertility and water retention capabilities. It was also home to a myriad of life forms, both visible and invisible to the naked eye. Willing to come together, not as foes, but friends. How can we learn to love one another? How can we serve as roots to feed each other? These removable side panels were turning out to be very practical. While you may think that only two sides would have been enough as removable panels to access the interior, having all sides movable is tremendously convenient. And while locking, unlocking, and moving the panels may seem like an annoying chore, it is turning out to be a huge improvement when compared to my previous flimsy temporary cages I had in my last yard. They did serve me for almost a decade, and still had several more years to them. But I must confess, this is much less cumbersome and makes tasks like mulching, weeding, and harvesting a breeze. I could only hope they would last as long. With a warming temperature, steady rainfall, and plenty of fertilizing mulch, I was sure that the kale would soon grow big enough for the first harvest as baby greens. We learn to love one another. How can we serve as roots to feed each other? And just a couple weeks later, the kale had gone from tiny direct sown seedlings to respectable salad-sized plantlets, ready to be harvested. It is always a joy to taste the first kale of the year. It is precisely at this time when they are the most tender and flavorful. If you generally don't like kale too much, you may want to taste it at this stage. This kale is supremely tender. In fact, this is the best stage, in my opinion, to eat kale. You can find it as baby kale in the stores, but only recently, because before all you could find was chopped up kale, and definitely not of this variety. This is the red Russian kale, which nowadays you do find in more health-conscious stores, grocery stores. But it might still be a hard find in regular grocery stores. I am overjoyed that this is working, and The only reason why it is because of this cage. Otherwise, groundhog would be all over this. That's for sure. This is its favorite food. And if it's not kept out of its reach, once it discovers it, it just goes bananas over it. I suppose the smell is what draws it in. So whenever you're harvesting, you might be inviting groundhogs if you have groundhogs in your area. And if you don't have groundhogs in your area, consider yourself very lucky. People usually eat kale cooked, and that makes sense if you are starting with the tougher, mature leaves. However, at this stage, their tenderness makes them prime candidate for eating raw. I grew up in Brazil, so kale, or more precisely collard greens, couve-manteiga as we used to call it, which translates to butter collards because of its buttery texture, was a staple in our food. My grandmother was born in the state of Minas Gerais, where the famous couve mineira dish is from. It is nothing more than wilted collards, as I have shown in an older video linked up in the cards above. But I think the raw kale has a more complex flavor with brighter, almost spicy overtones. The best way to enjoy kale at this stage is to eat it raw. But you don't only have to make a normal salad. I want to share you a recipe that's a little bit different. It is inspired by the Mediterranean tabbouleh salad. I'll be right back after this commercial. If you're loving the video and would like to help me produce more, you can purchase an original painting from my Etsy shop or support me through Patreon. Your direct support is the reason why I have been able to produce 2 episodes a week during the spring, so thank you. To make my remix kale tabbouleh salad, I first roughly chopped 1/4 of an onion. I love the taste of raw onion, but if you think it may be too much for you, you can wash it under running water in a sieve to reduce its pungency. Olha os olhos da menina, refletindo a selva mãe. I then cubed some cucumbers. It was too early to have garden-grown ones, so I had to use store-bought ones. I got the bunch of freshly picked baby kale leaves and chopped it up, dropping it in a bowl with other ingredients. Vejo os planos de Marina de crescer e estudar. Pega a estrada, sobe. Next, I grated a carrot to add color and crunch. Luta pelo luto, Chico Mendes e seu lar. I added chopped Kalamata olives, and instead of bulgur wheat, I used some cooked leftover brown rice fluffed with a fork. Using brown rice makes this recipe gluten-free instead of the normal bulgur wheat. It does have a different texture and taste, but I find it to be pleasant nonetheless. To season it, I added salt to taste, apple cider vinegar, or a vinegar of your choice, or lemon juice, and extra virgin olive oil, about half and half. I mixed everything together and tasted for salt. My rice was already seasoned, so I didn't have to add too much. You can adjust the amount of vinegar and olive oil to your taste. Luta pelo luto, Chico Mendes e seu lar. Cada dia aprende sua letra. Dança a valsa da palavra vida. Quando o sol raiar, Rio Verde renascer, canta sua poesia. Parsley is a good addition if you have some fresh to use. I must say that this is a very delicious and nutritious way of growing kale. I hope to do this recipe more often with my growing crop. Except a couple days later, the skies broke open and the sound of thousands of marbles dropping on my tin roof declared an apocalyptic warning. My garden's fate was at stake. I was poised to lose all I had planted so far with this freak spring hailstorm. My kale had been looking picture perfect thus far. I couldn't believe that right in front of my eyes, unseasonal hail threatened to raise my crop. Hail is just not a common occurrence here in Maryland, so I didn't have much experience with the aftermath. After 10 minutes of agony, the angry clouds dissipated from the mountainous horizon, and the kale looked like it had mostly survived the blows. But was this an omen of things to come? Would I get an abundant harvest, or would other calamities and pestilence call it first? You will find out in my upcoming videos. See you there.